High in the cliffs of the American Southwest, there is a place that doesn't look like a city at first. From a distance, it feels empty. Just rock, shadow, and silence. But as you get closer, patterns begin to appear. Rooms carved into stone, ladders connecting levels, spaces clearly shaped for daily life. This is Cliff Palace, at Mesa Verde. It wasn't built underground to hide. It was built this way to survive. The position mattered. The height mattered. Even the direction these walls faced mattered. Sunlight reached the rooms in winter. Shade protected them in summer. Every design choice reduced exposure to weather, to enemies, to scarcity. This wasn't improvisation. It was planning. Hundreds of people lived here. They cooked, stored food, raised families, and moved through this cliff as if it were a normal street. What makes Cliff Palace different isn't just where it was built. It's how carefully its builders understood their environment and how little they left to chance.
Living inside a cliff required more than shelter. It required coordination. Cliff Palace wasn't a collection of random rooms. It was a carefully organized living space, designed to manage movement, storage, and daily routines. People moved vertically instead of horizontally. Ladders connected levels. Narrow passages controlled access. Every transition slowed movement on purpose. This mattered for safety, but it also mattered for order. Food storage rooms were positioned away from living areas. Smoke from cooking fires exited through small openings, reducing buildup inside the dwellings. Water had to be carried up, step by step, making wasteful movement costly. Nothing here encouraged excess. Living spaces were compact. Walls were close. Voices carried easily. This created constant awareness of others. In a place like this, privacy was limited, but cooperation was unavoidable. Children grew up learning the layout of the cliff. They knew which ladders led where, which rooms were communal, which areas were not meant to be crossed freely. The architecture taught behavior. At the center of this system were circular rooms, often built slightly below ground level. These spaces were different. They weren't for storage. They weren't for cooking. They were for gathering. Inside these rooms, movement slowed. Sound behaved differently. Attention focused inward. The builders understood how space influences people. They used shape, height, and enclosure to guide how groups interacted. Outside the dwellings, the cliff face itself acted as a barrier. From above, access was limited. From below, visibility was controlled. This wasn't isolation. It was management. The city wasn't hidden from the world. It was positioned to see without being seen. What makes Cliff Palace remarkable is not just that people lived here, but that daily life functioned smoothly in a place that appears hostile at first glance. Everything here worked together: the stone, the sunlight, the layout, and the routines. This was not survival by chance. It was survival by design. For a place like Cliff Palace to function, it needed more than clever architecture. It needed balance. Everything here depended on the environment. Rainfall, temperature, sunlight, and timing determined whether life inside the cliff could continue. The builders understood this. They chose a location that faced the sun during winter, but remained shaded through the hottest months. Stone absorbed heat slowly, keeping temperatures stable throughout the day. This made daily life predictable, and predictability meant survival. Food production happened away from the cliff. Fields were spread across the mesa above, where soil was thin but workable. Crops depended entirely on seasonal rain. When rainfall was reliable, the system held. When it wasn't, pressure began to build. Storage rooms inside the dwellings were designed to protect surplus. Grain was kept dry and elevated. Access was controlled. Nothing about storage suggested abundance. It suggested caution. Life here required restraint. Every family depended on the same cycles. If one group overused resources, everyone felt the impact. The architecture enforced limits, but nature set the final boundaries. Over time, the climate began to change. Tree-ring evidence shows periods of prolonged drought. Rain became unpredictable. Growing seasons shortened. Harvests became less reliable. At the same time, the population of the region increased. More people meant more strain. Fields were used more intensely. Soil recovered more slowly. Water had to be carried farther. Inside the cliff, daily routines continued. But outside, the margins grew thinner. What's important is what didn't happen. There's no evidence of sudden destruction. No signs of violent collapse. No burned layers or mass graves. Life didn't end here. It shifted. Families likely began to leave gradually. Some seasons were missed. Some rooms went unused. Ladders were no longer repaired. Paths became less traveled. The city didn't fall. It emptied. This wasn't failure. It was adaptation. The same understanding that led people to build here also told them when it was time to move on. The cliff offered protection, but it couldn't create rain. It couldn't grow crops. It couldn't sustain a population beyond what the land allowed. What remains today is a snapshot, a moment where architecture, environment, and human decision-making aligned perfectly, and then moved on. Cliff Palace was never meant to last forever. It was meant to work for as long as conditions allowed. That may be the most important lesson it offers. Today, Cliff Palace stands silent. No voices, no movement, no smoke rising from stone rooms. But silence doesn't mean absence. It means distance. What we see now is not a ruin frozen in time, but the result of choices made carefully and deliberately. Modern visitors often ask the wrong question. They ask why the city was abandoned, as if leaving were a failure. But for the people who lived here, leaving was not collapse. It was continuity. They were never tied to a single place. They were tied to balance. Cliff Palace worked because it responded to its environment. When conditions supported life, people stayed. When those conditions shifted, they adapted. This way of thinking is difficult to understand today. Modern cities are designed to resist change. We build infrastructure to force stability, dams to control water, power grids to override climate, supply chains that stretch across continents. Cliff Palace had none of this. It relied on observation, restraint, and flexibility. Every decision was local. Every consequence was immediate. This created a different relationship with place. People didn't dominate the landscape. They negotiated with it. The cliff was not conquered. It was used carefully, with full awareness of its limits. This is why the city feels so intentional. Not because it was permanent, but because it was temporary by design. Archaeologists have found no signs of panic here. No hurried departures. No broken systems left behind. Instead, there is order. Rooms left intact. Structures allowed to fade naturally. This suggests something rare, a society willing to move before disaster forced them to. The cliff taught them when to stay and when to leave. What remains is not just architecture, but evidence of discipline. Every wall shows restraint. Every room shows purpose. Nothing was built larger than necessary. This economy of design is striking, especially when compared to modern construction, where excess is often mistaken for strength. Cliff Palace shows another model, one where success is measured by how little you need, not how much you can take. The city also challenges our idea of progress. We often assume history moves in a straight line toward bigger cities, greater control, and permanent structures. But Cliff Palace suggests a different trajectory, one where intelligence is expressed through adaptation, not expansion. The people here understood something fundamental. That stability is not the same as permanence. A structure can be stable without being eternal. A society can be successful without lasting forever. This mindset allowed them to survive in an environment that punished mistakes quickly. It also allowed them to leave without collapse. Today, Cliff Palace is protected, studied, preserved. But preservation can sometimes distort meaning. When we freeze a place in time, we risk forgetting that it was once dynamic, full of movement, full of decision-making. The ladders were climbed daily. The rooms were rearranged. The city changed slowly as people adjusted their lives around it. This wasn't a monument. It was a living system. And like all systems, it had a lifespan. What makes Cliff Palace remarkable is not that it ended, but that it ended well. No evidence of desperation. No signs of breakdown. Just transition. That may be its most powerful lesson. In a world facing climate instability, resource pressure, and growing population density, the logic behind Cliff Palace feels unexpectedly modern. It reminds us that sustainability is not about holding on at all costs. It is about knowing when to change. The city does not ask to be rebuilt. It asks to be understood, not as a mystery, not as a lost civilization, but as an example of how humans once lived with precision, awareness, and restraint. The cliff still stands, the rooms still hold their shape, and the silence remains, not as an ending, but as a record of a society that knew when enough was enough.